Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sarah Martinez had barely stepped off the transport bus at Camp Pendleton when she felt it. That sting of invisibility. The kind of silence people wrapped around someone they'd already decided didn't belong. She carried her duffel bag like the rest of them, wore the same boots, same camo, same rigid posture, but her presence stuck out like a bruise, not because she was weak, because she was one of the few women in Delta Company, and the only one, who didn't flinch under a stare. The sun poured over the concrete like molten brass. Unforgiving, she walked past the barracks with steady breaths, hiding the black belt beneath her standard-issue uniform and the fact that she'd been fighting since she was 7. Her father, a former Army Ranger, had taught her not to react, not to show her cards, and never to strike first. But the wolves were already circling. Well, what do we have here? The voice came like a slap southern drawl soaked in condescension. Corporal Jake Morrison, 220 pounds of swagger, scars, an unchecked ego. His crew followed like loyal shadows. Rodriguez with fists that looked like they'd broken more. Bonesden bricks. Thompson with eyes that enjoyed pain. Hayes the washed-up wrestler, and Carter, the quiet observer who never missed a detail. Morrison stepped in front of Sarah like he owned the road she was walking on. "You sure you got off at the right stop, sweetheart?" The cheerleader camp's about 50 miles that way. Laughter, loud enough to draw attention. Sarah didn't blink, didn't laugh, just nodded once and walked past him like he didn't exist. But that moment, that silence, it wasn't defeat, it was defiance. He blocked her again, closer this time. "Didn't your mama teach you manners?" His voice sharpened. "When a superior talks, you respond. You're not my superior," she said calmly. "We're all recruits here." There was a pause just long enough for the crowd to feel the shift. Morrison didn't say a word, just tightened his jaw and stepped aside, eyes locked on her retreating back. That night, the war began. The first days of training were a storm of forced smiles and sharpened knives. During formation runs, Morrison's crew bumped into her with just enough force to bruise, but not enough to raise suspicion. Rodriguez muttered, "Careful, princess. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." Loud enough to echo through the group. At lunch, Thompson knocked her tray from her hands. When she bent to clean it up, Hayes made a crude joke that sent laughter rolling through the mess hall like thunder. No one stopped it. Some looked away. Most watched. And Carter? He didn't speak, but her soap disappeared, then socks, then her bootlaces. Sarah said nothing. She moved like water quiet, flowing around her hits, absorbing every insult, every humiliation. Not because she was weak, because she was watching. She learned quickly. Rodriguez favored his right side old shoulder injury. Likely. Thompson dipped his shoulder just before a punch. Hayes was slow in transition. Carter was fast but lacked balance, and Morrison relied on brute force and bravado, but technique? None. She stored it all. They thought they were breaking her. What they were really doing was training her. Week 3 brought hand-to-hand combat training. It should have been her moment, but she knew better. She didn't show her skill. Not yet. Not while Morrison stood beside Sergeant Davis after every drill. Feigning concern, "Martinez is falling behind," he'd say. "We could help her, mentor her after hours." And Davis, grizzled, tired, stuck in the past, agreed. She needed extra attention. What followed wasn't training. It was punishment disguised as help. They pinned her to the mat, mocked her, told her how real enemies wouldn't go easy on her, that she didn't belong here, that she should consider a desk job, and through it all, she bit her tongue, endured, because her father had taught her, when you strike, it has to be decisive, final, undeniable, and something told her they were building to something. It came in week 4. The stress test, combat simulation, full contact, real rules, real consequences. Sergeant Davis addressed the recruits like he was announcing a purge. Today, we separate the warriors from the wannabes. Sarah's stomach twisted. Morrison caught her eye, smirked. "Sergeant," Morrison said, raising his hand like Head rehearsed this moment in his dreams. "I don't think Martinez is ready. Some of us experienced recruits could show her what she's up against." Davis paused, calculated, and nodded. The trap had been sprung. Morrison, Rodriguez, Thompson, Hayes, Carter, all five surrounded her. The facility buzzed with sick anticipation. "Don't worry, Princess," Morrison said, cracking his knuckles. "We'll go easy on you at first." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The first hit came fast. Morrison's hand on her shoulder, shoving her hard into Rodriguez. He caught her, pinned her, laughed. The second round came coordinated. Thompson wrapped her arms from behind. Hayes grabbed her legs. They drove her into the mat. "This is what happens when you're weak," Morrison sneered. Sarah felt her lips split. Blood filled her mouth. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from restraint. They released her again. Expecting her to crawl, she stood, not because she was brave, because she was done hiding. Had enough? Morrison mocked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She remembered her father's voice. "When you strike, make it count." What does it feel like to watch five predators realize they just picked the wrong prey? Time slowed. Every movement, every heartbeat, every breath thick with tension. Sarah Martinez stood in the middle of that training, mat bruised, bloodied, surrounded, but her eyes were clear now, focused. Her body shifted, subtle but electric. The wolves didn't notice. Not yet. Morrison strode forward, chest puffed. "Time to learn your place, Princess." His crew circled. Thompson lunged from behind. Sarah moved one breath, one pivot, one piston-like strike backward, her elbow crushing into Thompson's solar plexus. Hump. Air left his lungs in a rush. He dropped like a sandbag, purple-faced, gagging for breath, eyes bulging. Before anyone processed what had happened, Morrison's massive fist was already in motion, carving a brutal arc toward her face. She ducked, barely. Wind of it grazed her cheek. Then her leg swept out, low and sharp, a perfect arc beneath his knees. Morrison's eyes widened. Both feet left the ground. For half a second, the big man hung there, suspended, helpless. Then the mat met his back like a thunderclap. He didn't move. The facility went silent. But Sarah wasn't finished. Rodriguez roared. A wall of muscle charging at her like a freight train. But he wasn't fast. Just angry. Sarah pivoted. Her heel came around in a spinning arc, pure muscle memory. Drilled 1,000 times on a hardwood dojo floor. Crack. It landed on Rodriguez's side right, where it had been guarding that old shoulder injury all along. His charge faltered. His face twisted, and then he dropped to one knee. Ribs cradled, breath wheezing in short, pitiful gasps. 2 down. Hayes went low. A wrestler's crouch, textbook takedown, wrong sport, wrong woman. As he dove, Sarah sprawled backward, arms extended, weight dropped, used his momentum, flipped his body up and over. A judo throw so clean it could have been replayed in slow motion at the Olympics. Hayes hit the ground and didn't get back up. His eyes blinked, once, twice, then stared upward, empty. 3. Carter was the last. He hadn't touched her, hadn't thrown a single punch. But now he looked around. Thompson, twitching on the mat. Morrison, unconscious. Rodriguez folded over. Hayes moaning, and he understood. She wasn't a girl who got lucky. She was a storm. He raised both hands. "I'm good," he said, voice cracking like glass. No demo needed. Sarah stood in the center of the mat, the room still, every recruit frozen. Their sense of reality collapsing like a house of cards. 28 seconds. That's all it took. Even Sergeant Davis didn't speak. His mug slipped from his hands and shattered across the floor. Somewhere behind him, another recruit whispered, "Holy shit." Sarah wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. Same motion as before, but now it felt different. A warning, a line drawn in the dust. She scanned the room, eyes steady. Anyone else need a demonstration? She asked. Silence complete. Undeniable silence. By nightfall, the footage was everywhere. The security cam had captured it all, 28 seconds of perfect violence. Uploaded, shared, burned into hard drives across the base like wildfire through dry brush. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb watched it 5 times in a row. Get General Hayes on the phone, he muttered. She needs to see this. The general, highest-ranking female officer at Pendleton, was pulled out of a budget meeting and handed a laptop. She pressed play and didn't blink once. In the medical bay, Sarah sat on an exam table. Navy Corpsman Rodriguez, a man who'd treated Marines for 15 years, was patching her lip. He glanced up. You know, you've never seen anything like that. Those boys are gonna feel it for weeks. From across the hallway, she heard Morrison groan. What happened? He muttered. No truck, came Hayes's voice. Pain but tinged with admiration. Just a 5'4" reality check. Sarah said nothing, but inside, something shifted. Not pride, not vengeance, something deeper. She had held back for so long. Now the world had seen her, all of her. The transformation came faster than expected. The barracks buzzed with whispers. She moved like something out of a movie, one private said. Morrison never had a chance. I heard she's some kind of black belt. Another muttered. Father was special forces. Some versions said she'd trained in the mountains of Afghanistan. Others claimed she once knocked out a guy twice her size in a dark alley. Legend metastasized. Even those who'd seen it couldn't believe it, but Sarah? She didn't care for stories. She cared about what came next. That evening, Sergeant Davis addressed the company. His voice was low, measured. What happened in the training facility today, he said, will not be discussed outside this unit. Let the words settle. But every one of you just learned a lesson about judgment, about assumptions, about strength. His eyes swept over the crowd. Size, gender, appearance, none of it matters when you're under pressure. What matters is how you fight when the odds are against you. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. The next morning, the mess hall went silent. Morrison walked in, stiff, bruised, black eye blooming across his face. He stepped toward Sarah's table, crew in tow, those who could walk. At least, every recruit stopped eating. Morrison stood 3 feet away, hands loose, voice clear. Martinez, he said, I owe you an apology. Sarah didn't look up. Not yet. What we did. It wasn't training, it was bullying. And yesterday, you showed us what real strength looks like. She lifted her eyes. His tone was different. Honest, no sarcasm, no armor. I learned more about combat in those 30 seconds than I did in 4 years of football and 6 weeks of training. Rodriguez stepped forward, wrapped in fresh bandages. We were wrong about you. Dead wrong. And if anyone here still has a problem with you. He paused. They'll have to go through us first. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she didn't cry. She nodded, once. And that was enough, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why was the highest-ranking general at Camp Pendleton watching her on repeat? Sarah had just finished a morning run when the message came through. Report to General Patricia Hayes. Immediately, most recruits only saw the inside of her office. Once, when they were either promoted or discharged. As she walked toward headquarters, boots thudding softly on concrete, Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt focus. She'd trained for years in silence, carried humiliation on her back. Like a second pack. Now, for the first time, someone at the top wanted to know why inside. General Hayes stood with arms crossed. Eyes fixed on the frozen frame of the security footage paused on her screen. Morrison midair, Sarah standing beneath him, still calm, unshaken. The general didn't look away when Sarah entered. Sit. Sarah did the air in the room. Felt different, dense, heavy, respectful. I'd been watching this footage for 2 hours. The general said, studying it, not just the techniques. The decision-making, the restraint. Sarah stayed silent. I have one question for you. A pause. Where did you learn to fight like that? Sarah met her gaze without hesitation. My father, ma'am, former Army Ranger, started training me when I was 7. Why? Sarah inhaled. Because he told me the world would underestimate me. That being good wasn't enough. I had to be undeniable. Twice the skill just to be considered equal. Hayes studied her face. And what did he teach you about using those skills? Sarah straightened. That real strength is about protection, not domination. That knowing how to fight doesn't mean you should silence. Stretch, then. The general smiled. Your father sounds like a wise man. She stepped away from the screen, and he raised one hell of a Marine. What came next was unexpected. Martinez, I'm making you an offer. Hayes said, after graduation, I want you to consider becoming a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Sarah blinked. Not just to teach strikes or throws, the general continued, but to help us rewrite what strength means in this course: technique, discipline, philosophy, respect. Sarah's throat tightened. This wasn't just recognition. It was responsibility. It would be an honor, ma'am. Good. Hayes said, because starting tomorrow, you're helping me draft new combat protocols. That night, Sarah didn't sleep, not because of nerves, but because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to hide who she was. Word spread like lightning. General Hayes was backing her. Every recruit now saw Sarah through a different lens, not as the girl who survived Morrison's crew, but as someone who could stand in front of 5 men and walk away stronger. The whispers grew louder, more reverent. She's going to change everything, one private said. She already did, came the reply, but Sarah didn't bask in it. She showed up to every drill on time, ate in silence, helped others when they fell behind. And she never once brought up the fight, because real strength didn't need reminders. It needed consistency. 6 weeks passed. On the final day of training, Sarah stood in attention, facing the drill instructors and command staff, her posture perfect, chin high, eyes forward. Her record was flawless, and she'd earned the top spot in Delta Company. When her name was called, the recruits didn't just clap. They roared. Even Morrison stood, clapping slowly, his black eye long faded, but the lesson burned into him forever. As Sarah stepped forward to accept her commendation, Sergeant Davis gave her a subtle nod. It was the first and only one she ever received from him, but it meant everything. 2 weeks later, Sarah Martinez stood in front of a new class of recruits behind her. The security footage played in muted black and white. The takedown, the 28 seconds that changed everything. Morrison stood beside her, now healed, humble, and her assistant instructor. The room was silent. Recruits stared in awe. Sarah spoke. The first thing you need to understand, she said, is that strength comes in many forms. She walked slowly, eyes scanning the room. Some of you are fast, some are strong, some are quiet, some are loud, but none of that matters here. She paused. What matters is what you do when no one believes in you, when the room is against you, when you're alone. The recruits didn't move. You don't fight to prove something. You fight because it's the only thing left between you and the people. You protect. She pointed at the screen behind her. I didn't win that fight because I was angry. I won because I was ready. After the lesson, Morrison leaned toward her. Never thought I'd say this, he muttered, but you make a damn good teacher. Sarah smirked. Still sore? Every time I sneeze. They shared a quiet laugh, not out of pride, out of respect. That night, as the sun sank behind Camp Pendleton, Sarah walked the same path she had on her first day, same boots, same ground. But now, she wasn't invisible. She was the example, and deep in the barracks, recruits whispered the story again, over and over, about the girl who knocked out 5 Marines, not because she wanted to, but because they gave her no choice. What happens after the fight is over, but the war within you keeps going? Sarah Martinez stood in front of a mirror at 0500, brushing back her hair with steady hands outside. The barracks still slept. A few lights flickered somewhere in the distance. Cadence chants echoed over training fields. But in here, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that lets your doubts crawl in. Everyone knew the story, now the 28 seconds. The 5 men, the takedown, they called it a legend, a transformation. A reckoning, but Sarah, she just remembered the blood in her mouth, the sound of her father's voice in her head, the restraint it took not to break Morrison's jaw when she had the chance. Respect. He always said, that's the difference between a fighter and a thug, and that line. It was thinner than she thought. 3 weeks into her instructor assignment, Sarah was exhausted, not from the physical grind, from something deeper. She had become the symbol they paraded, an icon of change. They assigned her to every interview panel, used her face in recruitment posters, even mentioned her name during officer briefings, but nobody asked how it felt to go from invisible to spectacle. They only cared about the story, not the way of carrying it. The newest batch of recruits wasn't like the last. They were harder, not meaner, but distracted. One of them, Private Kessler, came in angry, loud, the kind of recruit who felt the need to announce his toughness at every turn. You only got this job because you made a scene, he spat one day after a sparring drill. They're afraid of bad press. You're a mascot. It wasn't the words that cut it. Was the truth she heard behind them. Sarah stared at him, jaw locked. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show him he'd touched a nerve. But when she hit the mat that night, alone, training long after lights out, her hand shook. Morrison found her there. Thought I'd find you here, he said. Leaning against the wall, Sarah didn't look up. You don't have to prove anything, you know, he said quietly. She exhaled. Then why do I feel like I do? Morrison didn't answer right away. Because you're not fighting them anymore, he said. You're fighting the silence that used to surround you, and now it's gone. It's just you. The next day, Kessler refused to fall in. Lying during formation, he smirked as Sarah walked past, whispered something to the guy beside him. She ignored it during drills. He yawned during her instructions. She ignored that too. But then came the mat. I'm not afraid of you, he said, bouncing lightly on his feet. Everyone else might be, but I'm not. Sarah didn't speak. You going to show me the 28-second move? He mocked. Or are we just doing press tours now? She stepped onto the mat and waited. Kessler lunged fast, sloppy. He'd never faced someone who didn't flinch. Sarah slipped left, redirected his momentum, and sent him sprawling with a soft, precise foot sweep. He scrambled up, red-faced. Again. He hissed. She nodded. He came at her harder, angrier. She parried, turned, and locked his wrist before he could land a punch. They stayed there frozen. Then she let go. Kessler fell to his knees, panting. Why didn't you finish it? He barked. Sarah crouched beside him. Calm. Because you weren't fighting me, she said. You were fighting the idea of me. That night, Kessler sat beside her during chow. Didn't speak, just sat. Sometimes that's all an apology needs to be. But not everything was settled. Sarah's promotion was fast-tracked. Whispers of officer candidate school followed her now. Every evaluation she passed, every class she trained, the pressure grew. Upward trajectory, someone called it. But for Sarah, it felt more like altitude sickness. One night, in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling. What happens when your strength becomes the only thing people see? General Hayes called her into her office again. This time, no video playing. Just quiet. You're doing good work, the general said. Thank you, ma'am. You don't look like you believe it. Sarah hesitated. I don't want to be a symbol, she said. Then stop thinking like one, the general replied. Symbols don't sweat. They don't bleed. They don't cry behind the barracks. Sarah blinked. You knew? I was the only woman here 30 years ago, Hayes said. I know every version of that look. You want to know the truth? Sarah nodded. You're changing this place, not with fists, with presence, with patience. That's harder than any fight you'll ever win. Sarah's throat tightened. It's okay to be tired, the general added. Just don't let it convince you that you're alone. Weeks passed, the new recruits finished their first cycle. Graduation day arrived. Family members filled the stand's new uniforms. Crisp flags rippling under the open sky. Sarah stood at the edge of the parade grounds, hands behind her back, watching Morrison step beside her. You thinking about your graduation day? He asked. She nodded. I didn't realize it at the time, she said. But that day, I wasn't proud. Why not? Because I felt like I had to win something just to exist. Morrison looked out at the field. And now? Sarah's eyes followed one of the new female recruits, a quiet girl from New Jersey, who barely spoke in the first 2 weeks, but had finished top 3 in every drill. Now I don't feel like I have to win, Sarah said softly. I just have to show up. That night, as taps echoed through the base and lights dimmed across the training yard, Sarah sat on the steps outside her quarters. A cool breeze stirred the flag overhead. She wasn't sure where she was headed next, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding anymore, and the war within her? It wasn't over, but it wasn't winning either. Why did saving someone's life feel more like a burden than a victory? The air was different now. Back at base, people treated her like a walking miracle. The Marine who stopped the bleed, who kept calm, who made the impossible happen. But Sarah Martinez didn't feel like a hero. She felt haunted. Vance survived. They said she'd saved him by 30 seconds, any longer, and he would have bled out before Diaz arrived. But his leg was gone. His deployment over, he was being flown home, discharged with honors. And Sarah couldn't stop seeing his face, the pale, sweating version of it, when he looked at her from the ground and whispered, Is that true? About the 5 guys? She stopped sleeping. Her dreams were quicksand screams, flares, blood that wouldn't wash off. During the day, she smiled, trained. LA drills. At night, she sat alone with her gear, cleaning a sidearm she never fired, going over field reports like prayers she couldn't forget. She kept hearing her father's voice in her head. Just because you survive the fight doesn't mean you walk away clean. One night, Diaz joined her near the perimeter fence. The moonlight caught the edge of her face, soft and gray. You think too much, she said. Sarah didn't answer. You saved his life. Sarah shook her head. I barely saved it. You still saved it. They sat in silence for a while. Then Diaz whispered, You ever wonder what it'd feel like if you couldn't? Sarah looked down. That's the part that scares me. The next morning, a new assignment came down. The team was going dark for 72 hours. Intel had flagged a weapons cache in an abandoned rail depot just north of the old sector line. No confirmed hostiles, but rumors. Too many for command to ignore. Sarah was tapped to co-lead the op. Rios would stay back and coordinate extraction. Sarah Martinez would be the tip of the spear. Holly raised an eyebrow. You ready for that? He asked. Sarah nodded, but the nod wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be. She kept remembering what Diaz said. What if you couldn't save them next time? The operation began at 0200. 4 Marines moved silently through narrow ravines and crumbled foundations. Night vision goggles hummed. Radios whispered. Sarah led from the front. She mapped the terrain with quiet confidence, every footstep careful, precise. They reached the depot by sunrise. No guards, no resistance. But Sarah felt it. The tension. Something was wrong. Inside the old warehouse, the crates were empty, set up to look full from recon drones, but hollow, staged, trap. Diaz whispered. Could be, Sarah replied. She raised a fist, waited, then click. A metal snap echoed. Tripwire. Hawley froze mid-step. Everyone held their breath. Sarah moved slowly toward him. Kneeling near his boot, her fingers traced the wire to wire. Its root, a handmade trigger, wired to a stack of concussive rounds in the far wall. Cheap, fast, brutal. She reached into her pack, pulled out a wire cutter, and began the slow, steady dance of diffusal. Nobody breathed. Even the air seemed afraid. Snip. The wire went limp. The trap didn't, but that wasn't the victory. The victory was her hand steady this time. No shake, no freeze, no panic. They pulled back at dusk. No. Shots fired. But something had shifted. Sarah had led them in and out. Clean. No injuries. No flare-ups. No blood. Just silence and safety. Back at base. Rios clapped her on the shoulder. "Clean up," he said. "Hard to find those anymore." Sarah nodded. But the truth was, she hadn't felt fear this time. She hadn't hesitated, and more than that, she felt ready. That evening, she received a message from command, a formal invitation to apply for officer candidate school. General Hayes had put her name forward personally. Sarah sat on her bunk and stared at the letter. Her first instinct was doubt, then fear, then something else, not pride. Not exactly. It was the quiet realization that maybe, for the first time in her life, she was no longer proving something to others. She was just becoming the person her father trained her to be. That night, Diaz brought out a bottle of contraband bourbon, just a sip each, passed around the squad. For the successful mission, for coming back whole. They laughed, quietly. Even Holly smiled. But when the bottle came to Sarah, she didn't drink right away. She looked out over the fence, toward the darkness they'd just returned from. Then she lifted the bottle. "For Vance," she said, and took her sip. After everyone drifted away, Holly stayed behind. "Word is, they want you to lead your own unit next." "Yeah," he said. Sarah nodded. "Think you'll say yes?" "I don't know," she admitted. He looked at her for a long time. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I still am." He smiled. "Good. That means you're sane." Then he added, "But you don't lead because you stop being afraid. You lead because people follow how you handle fear." She stayed up late that night. Didn't dream. Didn't need to. For the first time, she knew exactly who she was. Not the girl from the video. Not the mascot. Not the fighter. She was a Marine, and her next chapter was coming fast. What do you do when the mission makes you choose between the objective and your people? 2 months later, Sarah Martinez was no longer just a name whispered in barracks or etched into a viral video. She had a team, her own Bravo element forward. Recon Unit 7. She was officially a second lieutenant now earned through blood. Not favors, and the youngest officer in her battalion. But rank doesn't protect you from doubt. If anything, it sharpens it. The first time she walked into the TOC Tactical Operations Center, her team rose instinctively. That surprised her. Respect wasn't something she demanded. It was something that followed you in silence after they'd seen what you'd do when things went wrong. And her unit? They'd heard. Most had watched the footage. But Sarah didn't want to be followed because of a legend. She wanted to be followed because of who she was in the present tense. Her team was lean, private quiet, analytical, a former engineering student who could calculate drone arc with a piece of chalk and a stick. Corporal Ruiz older, grounded, a seasoned field runner with a tendency to mumble wisdom under his breath. Sergeant Keene her second, former airborne, steady hands, loyal to the bone, and Bishop, scout sniper, detached, dry-humored, lethal, the kind of man who didn't believe in much until someone proved they were worth believing in. Sarah was determined to earn that. Their first mission came without warning. A small village on the edge of a demilitarized zone had gone silent. Intel suggested possible insurgent occupation. But something was off. No video, no satellite feed, total blackout. Bravo element was tasked with recon and, if possible, humanitarian evacuation, standard rules. Avoid engagement. Do not escalate. Preserve civilian life. Sarah briefed the team at 0500. They moved out by 0630. The terrain was difficult. Dense hills. Fog rolling off the ridgelines like smoke. They reached the village by nightfall and found it empty. No signs of battle, no bodies, just silence. Sarah felt it in her spine. Something was wrong. They split into pairs to search the buildings. Sarah and Keen entered what looked like a schoolhouse. Chalkboards still had half-erased letters scrawled on them. Desks overturned, dried food on the floor. Like people had left mid-breath. Keen crouched. No signs of struggle. Sarah touched the child's drawing pinned to the wall, a stick figure, holding hands with a tank. Then static burst on her comm. Ruse's voice. We found them. 10 clicks west, underground hold. Survivors, civilians, lots. Then a pause. An armed man. Sarah's chest tightened. She rallied the team and moved toward Ruiz's coordinates. It took 40 minutes. The underground structure was hidden inside a hillside barn. Doors camouflaged, reinforced, inside. Over 24 civilians. Families, old women, children, and 5 armed insurgents. Not actively threatening anyone, but armed nonetheless. They claimed they were protecting the civilians from regional raiders. Ruiz whispered to her. They haven't raised their weapons. They're just here. Sarah nodded. Then her radio crackled again. Command says eliminate all hostile presence and extract the civilians. Her stomach dropped, because that, by the book, meant taking out those 5 men, even if they hadn't fired a shot. Even if doing so would traumatize everyone hiding inside. Even if it turned a tense situation into a bloodbath. Keen stepped beside her. Orders are orders. Sarah said nothing. Then, are they? She stepped into the center of the barn. Calm, hands raised. The 5 men shifted, gripped rifles tighter, one of them tall, beard streaked with gray-locked eyes with her. You here to kill us? No, Sarah said softly. I'm here to make sure no one else dies. He studied her. You don't look like most officers. Neither do you. The tension in the room pulsed. Then, he lowered his weapon. The others followed. Sarah exhaled. Then, get out, she said. Now, they left. Weapons slung. Heads down. No gunfire. No casualties. Her team held the perimeter. Quiet. Watching. Sarah didn't look back. Later that night, command called. What part of eliminate did you not understand? Lieutenant? Sarah replied without hesitation. The part where they were never a threat. Silence. Then, you'll be debriefed when you return. She nodded. Understood. But in her gut, she knew she'd just painted a target on her back. The evac went smoothly. The civilians were flown out within 24 hours. The children waved to her from the tarmac. The oldest among them handed her a scrap of cloth, a symbol from their village. Sarah tucked it into her pocket. Didn't speak, didn't need to. The next morning, Bishop approached her. He stood with arms crossed, eyes narrowed. You went against the book. He said, I did. And you'd do it again? Sarah held a stare. Yes. A long pause. Then Bishop nodded once. You've got my loyalty, he said. Now and always. But consequences were coming. She knew it. Her report was already under review. And whispers floated through the ranks. Martinez disobeyed. Let insurgents go. Compromised the mission. But her team stood by her and Sarah. She slept that night, for the first time in weeks. Because sometimes leadership wasn't about getting it right. It was about choosing who you're willing to answer to, and she could live with herself. What if the real test came not in training, but in silent smiles from anyone who could help? 6 months had passed as did 28 seconds that made her name. But legends didn't matter in the real world. Not where the ground could swallow you whole. Not where radios cut out. And choices had consequences no sparring session could prepare you for. Sarah was deployed now. no longer just an instructor. She was attached to a recon team on a joint training mission, overseas light footprint, low visibility, high stakes. No press, no fanfare, just maps, coordinates, and tension you could taste in your throat. The mission was simple. Gather intel in a disputed border zone and return without triggering any engagements. Quiet in, quiet out, but war zones had a way of making simple things complicated. Her unit was made up of experienced boots, each with their own scars. Sergeant Rios, team leader, tactical, quiet, sharp eyes always scanning. Corporal Vance, demolitions, smart, funny, nervous when things got too quiet. Staff Sergeant Halle, ex-sniper, built like a tree trunk and just as talkative. And then there was Diaz, a field medic with a sharp tongue and a laugh like gravel. Sarah was the newest, the youngest. She didn't need to be liked. She needed to be trusted. It didn't start well. Their first night at the forward base, Halle looked her over. With a raised brow, "You're the girl from the video, right?" She paused. "I'm Martinez." He chuckled. "Right. The Marine who dismantled 5 guys in under a minute." She said nothing. Halle leaned in. "You'd better be more than a viral clip out here." Sarah didn't flinch. "I am. The first." 2 days were uneventful. They moved through dense brush, scanned ridgelines, tagged enemy equipment caches from a distance, relayed coordinates to command. No action, no gunfire, just heat, silence, and tension. Sarah watched, listened, learned how Rios gave orders without words, how Diaz moved toward danger instinctively, how Halle didn't trust anyone who flinched. At gunfire, she earned their respect not with speeches, but with consistency. When a hill climb left others breathless, she kept pace. When a drone battery failed mid-recon, she fixed it under pressure. And when a wild dog stumbled into their path, snarling, Sarah didn't reach for her weapon. She calmed it quietly and let it walk away. The mission changed on day 3. The team intercepted chatter about a potential insurgent meeting point near an abandoned farming outpost. Rio sent them to check it out, 1 hour in and out. Sarah went with Halle and Vance, radios crackling as they moved under fading light. But halfway there, the signal cut. Then came the blast. The mine was buried under thick grass. Vance never saw it. 1 step, and his body lifted into the air. When he hit the ground, everything was blood and screams. Sarah's ears rang. Dirt rained. From the sky, she crawled toward the motionless heap that was Vance, her mind fighting to stay clear, his leg gone. Shrapnel in his side, arterial spray. Halle screamed into a dead radio. Sarah didn't wait. She ripped her belt free, wrapped it high on Vance's thigh, cinched it tighter than should be possible. His screams grew sharper, then faded. "You're okay," she whispered, voice shaking. "You're okay. Stay with me." But her hands were slick with blood, and the seconds were running. The sun dropped. Halle fired a flare. Then another. No answer. Rios was too far out. Evac might not come in time. Sarah leaned over Vance, blood soaking her knees. His pulse was fading, skin going pale. "Talk to me," she said. "Tell me something." "Anything," he blinked. "They say you took out 5 guys. Is that true?" She forced a smile. "They only counted the ones who got up." Vance coughed, laughed, a weak sound. But it was enough to keep him conscious. When Rios and Diaz arrived, breathless and mud-covered, they found Sarah pressing against Vance's wounds. With both hands, arms trembling but locked, Diaz went to work immediately. Rios pulled her back. "You saved his life." Sarah didn't speak. She didn't feel heroic. She felt broken, shaking, cold. But she didn't cry. Not then. Vance was airlifted out that night. The base was quiet when they returned. Nobody said much. Diaz cleaned her hands. Halle poured her a canteen of water without looking at her. Sarah sat outside her tent, watching the stars, not thinking, just breathing. The next morning, Halle sat beside her. "You didn't freeze," he said. "I almost did, but you didn't." She nodded. Most people do. Later, Rios handed her a folded note. A message from command. Recommendation for commendation. Immediate eligibility for advanced field leadership assessment. Sarah stared at it for a long time and folded it back, not out of pride, but because recognition felt small compared to what was almost lost. That night, Diaz asked her a question. You ever think about quitting? Sarah looked up. Back at Pendleton, every day. So why didn't you? She paused. Because I wanted to stop being the person they assumed I was, and start being the one I chose to be. Diaz nodded. No one's ever ready for their first trauma, she said. But what you did out there, that's who you are now. Sarah lay in her cot, eyes open. The footage of Pendleton played again in her mind, the takedowns, the silence, the power she'd earned, but none of it compared to the image she saw now. Blood on her hands, a Marine. In her arms, and the breath she kept alive with sheer will. Strength wasn't just technique. It was staying when your mind begged to flee. It was kneeling in mud, with no backup, and still whispering, "You're going to live." What does it take to hold your ground when the whole system pushes back? Sarah Martinez stood alone at the tribunal table. 3 senior officers watched her from across a long wooden desk. Their expressions unreadable. Her record sat open in front of them, thick with field reports, commendations, and citations. But today wasn't about her victories. It was about her defiance. The man in the center, Colonel Ward, leaned forward. You were ordered to eliminate all armed threats. Sarah nodded once. Yes, sir. You chose to let 5 armed insurgents walk. They weren't insurgents, she said calmly. They were villagers, militia by necessity. They never raised a weapon. You can't know their intentions. I knew their actions. That's what I judged. Colonel Ward tapped his pen. What if you were wrong? I wasn't. The room went quiet, a long silence, and a question came, not from Ward, but from the woman on the right, General Hayes. What if we hadn't known you at all? If we hadn't seen what you're capable of back at Pendleton, in the field, with Vance, would we still believe you now? Sarah held her gaze. I hope not. Hayes raised an eyebrow. I hope you'd believe any Marine who did what I did, not because of what they've done before, but because it was right. Hayes leaned back, thoughtful. Ward scribbled something. The 3rd officer remained silent. Finally, Ward spoke. Your recommendation for command advancement is being held for review. You'll return to base until a decision is made. Sarah stood, saluted, understood. She turned to leave, but just before she reached the door, Hayes said quietly, You were right, Martinez. Sarah didn't turn back. She simply walked forward. Back at Bravo's camp, no one asked what happened. They knew, not because they were there, but because they trusted her. Trust, she'd learned, was not something earned in moments of glory. It was built in silence, cemented in the way you stood when everything in you wanted to fold. 3 weeks later, the call came. She was cleared. No reprimand, no advancement yet. But the message was clear. She had survived the system on her own terms again. More time passed, operations slowed. Her team rotated back stateside. Sarah stood on the tarmac, watching each of them board the transport one by one. Ruiz gave her a tired nod. Don't let them burn you out. LT. Bishop walked up last. Heard you're staying on another cycle? I am. You're either the most dedicated Marine I've ever met, he said, or the most stubborn. Sarah smiled faintly. Maybe both. He hesitated, then held something out to her, a folded piece of cloth, the one the village elder had given her weeks ago. I kept this safe, he said. Didn't want you to forget what you stood for. She took it without a word, and for a moment, neither of them saluted. They just nodded, as equals. 6 months later, Camp Pendleton, another wave of recruits. Another class, green and uncertain. Sarah stood at the front of the mat, calm, composed, changed. The 28-second footage no longer played behind her. It had been retired from training, not erased, just preserved. Legend had given way to legacy. A new assistant instructor walked beside her private tran, now promoted. "You sure you want to keep doing this?" he asked. Sarah looked out over the young faces in front of her. One girl at the end of the row stood a little straighter, her shoulders tight, eyes hardened from something unseen. Sarah recognized that look. She'd worn it once. "I want to keep doing this," she said, then stepped forward. "The uniform doesn't give you strength," Sarah told them. "Neither does rank, or muscle, or a record." Her voice was steady, quiet, true. "Strength is what's left when there's nothing protecting you but your own decision to keep going." A pause. "And leadership isn't barking orders or standing tall. It's standing still when the pressure says move. It's protecting what matters, even when no one's watching." The recruits said nothing, but they listened. Every one of them. That night, Sarah walked alone across the parade grounds. The stars above looked the same as they had on her first day, but everything inside her had shifted. She had been underestimated, mocked, tested, and remade. Not into something harder, but into something truer. Inside her quarters, she unpacked the cloth Bishop had given her. She hung it on the inside of her locker. A quiet reminder, not of a fight, but of a choice she would keep making again and again. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it doesn't yell, it doesn't punch. First, it simply stands its ground and refuses to disappear.